Julian Hill, so good to have you back with us on Afternoon Briefing. These seem like testing times for social cohesion in our nation after the upswell of violence yet again in the Middle East. It actually, to my eyes, looks a little like the atmosphere we saw on the 8th and 9th of October last year. How politically and religiously charged do you believe communities are in Australia right now, particularly compared back to October last year?
There's no doubt that our social cohesion is under strain, and that's for a range of reasons. The reality of life in modern Australia has been for decades, and now is no different, that conflicts globally do impact daily life here in Australia. We're a globally connected society. On the weekend, I was out speaking to Oromo and Tigrayan Australians from Ethiopia. I've spoken to people last week from Sudan, of course a large Ukrainian community in my part of the world, and nationally people from Myanmar, but of course the horrific and worsening conflict and violence in the Middle East. There's also foreign interference and other stresses on social cohesion, but I'd also call out the role of leadership. Leadership really matters. Words matter and tone matters, whether that's political leaders, faith leaders or community leaders. The way we talk and conduct ourselves impacts social cohesion, and unfortunately what we're seeing on both extremes of the political spectrum, we've got the Greens political party actively spreading disinformation and misinformation. Australia is not selling weapons or ammunition to Israel, yet they keep repeating the lie. And on the other hand, we've got the most divisive and negative opposition leader in Australian history, with 20 years, frankly, of race-baiting politics in Peter Dutton, who's trying to pour petrol on a fire and politically profit by creating further disharmony. So it's a tough environment.
All right. Well, since you've taken us there, I might put to you, Julian, a few comments made by Peter Dutton today. So there is a strong presumption held by him and colleagues, I believe, that a number of people who engaged in protests, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne last weekend, displaying pictures or flags of support for Hezbollah and its former leader, are foreigners here on visas. Do you, as Minister, capable of taking briefings from agencies, have any information that that is the case?
The short answer is no. I'll make my comment on Peter Dutton and then on the substance of the matter. Look, at every turn, Peter Dutton is obsessed with the Middle East, not Middle Australia. On any day, on every day that he can pour petrol on a fire and disrupt community harmony and profit from international conflicts, he seeks to do so. He doesn't want to talk about cost of living, doesn't want to recall Parliament to deal with the housing bill stuck in the Senate. When we recalled Parliament to deal with gas price and electricity prices, he voted against it. But now, it's always about the Middle East. On the substance of the matter, Minister Burke, Tony Burke is the Cabinet Minister who I work to, has made very clear that if Peter Dutton or anyone has evidence of people on visas creating, inciting discord or breaking the law, then we will consider cancelling those visas. We couldn't be clearer. And if people have that evidence, they should present it to us.
OK, so as a general observation then, if a temporary visitor on a visa has glorified a listed terrorist organisation, what would be your inclination? Yes, you would consider cancellation, but is there an inclination to do that swiftly?
Yeah, so look, I'll give a couple of answers there. Firstly, last year, in terms of the law, the Parliament passed some of the strongest laws on hate speech, and those laws, I hope, are used wherever possible, and they're yet to be tested in the courts. On the issue of visa cancellations, it's one of the differences, and Peter Dutton should know better, frankly. He was a Minister for Home Affairs and Immigration, wasn't a very good one, given the shocking mess which the system was left in. It was all politics and no hard work of administration and policy. But anyone who's occupied these portfolios knows that it's deeply unwise to speculate in advance of having the decision in front of you on specific fact situations. To be blunt in legal terms, the lawyers, there'd be a few of them watching, would know that that can lead to a case of apprehended bias and ministers' decisions being knocked out in the courts, which is in no one's interest, to create a lawyer's picnic by ministers shooting their mouths off on television to get a headline. Yeah. I would be very clear that we would look swiftly at cancelling visas for people who've broken the law in Australia or incited serious discord in the community. Visitors to Australia are here as visitors. Visa holders are here as visitors, and they're rightly held to a high standard of behaviour. The kinds of things which are being talked about should well be reason to refuse visas or indeed cancel visas, and ministers look at the decisions that are put in front of them promptly.
All right, thank you for clearing that up, and I do understand the legal constraints on a minister wandering into that space. Why don't we then talk about the laws themselves, which I guess primarily in this case would apply to Australian citizens, Julian Hill. At least 7 investigations are underway into possible breaches of the hate symbols laws that were passed but are pretty much brand new for 2024. Again, Peter Dutton is suggesting that it might be necessary to recall Parliament to further strengthen those. Does it appear to you that there are deficiencies in those powers as passed last year, as they came into force this year?
Well, they were voted on by the Parliament. Peter Dutton voted for them. Indeed, I think he ran around trying to claim credit for them. They went through a bipartisan process. In my former life, I was a member of the Intelligence and Security Committee, and we examined these laws, and I think our recommendations, if I recall, were taken up. So on one hand, Peter Dutton tried to claim credit for laws which he's now trying to pretend are too weak without being specific, and yet at the same time, as you've just said, there are active investigations. How about we let the police do their job in the normal way of any new laws? They get tested in the courts, and any responsible government, of course, we will monitor the situation going forward. But I repeat again, you know, recalling Parliament to strengthen laws without being specific when the police are already using those laws is just utterly ridiculous. He doesn't want to talk about Middle Australia. He doesn't want to talk about cost of living. He's obsessed with the Middle East, and that's a matter for him. All right,
let's move on to conversion of Palestinian visas from their initial status. 1,300 made it to Australia on visitor visas. Your Senior Minister Tony Burke said today, Julian, that 12 families, a very modest number so far, have been converted onto humanitarian visas. What's the expectation of the balance here, roughly speaking, 1,300? How quickly might they be converted?
Well, as you know, no great state secret here, every visa decision is individual and people need to meet the required character standards, security standards and have the right pathway. That's, you know, a statement of the obvious, but it needs to be said. What the Palestinian community, and I'm very close to the Palestinian community given my electorate and work over many years, what people have been calling for is to receive the same treatment, the same visa pathway as Ukrainians, and I think that's what Minister Burke was referring to. We're now at that time that's what we're starting to look at. So we'll work through that caseload. Similarly, we're examining the situation of Ukrainians and other people who've been in our country who have legitimate claims over recent years. That's what we do. Yeah. Look, the other point that I just make, and it goes to the situation with Palestinians from Gaza and some of the politics that's been whipped up around this. So many of these people, they're just vulnerable people fleeing a war zone. They've been subject to the right security checks. Many have family in Australia. One thing I can say, despite the extremes of Peter Dutton and the Greens, I say with absolute conviction and confidence that the vast majority of Australians do not want to see foreign conflicts in any part of the world politicised here that could lead to violence or ripping our society, the fabric of our multicultural society, apart. I say that very firmly and clearly, and the government will stand with multicultural communities, but will stand in the interests of all Australians so that any Australian feels safe in our country, can display and practice their faith, their cultural identity, and feel like they belong in our country.
Yeah, look, to that end, Julian, you also now have an Islamophobia envoy appointed in Aftab Malik. What are his first priorities?
Well, yes, we do have an Islamophobia envoy appointed. I think it's his first day in the job, so I don't think it'd be helpful, given we've appointed him to engage widely across the Australian community, to listen, to hear competing views, to give advice to government and, you know, engage publicly. I don't think it's helpful if a government minister comes on television and tells him how to do his job. One thing, and I think Tony addressed this, he's had the lead on finalising this appointment. We've taken our time with it to get it right. He spent his first couple of months in the portfolio listening, consulting widely on the qualities of the sort of person who we want to do this job. Aftab's name, Mr Malik's name, came up regularly, and I'm pleased that we've progressed that appointment. There's been a bit of criticism that somehow that's taken a while, and
yes,
sure, I wish it had happened earlier, but I do think it's actually pretty offensive to Muslim Australians, some of the debate that's been had suggesting that they should all think with one brain cell. We've got one of the world's most diverse Muslim communities. There's more than 50 Islamic countries across the world, and there's a whole range of views represented in the community. So we've taken our time to find an appointment in Aftab Malik, who we believe has the skills, the capabilities and the trust to do his job.
No doubt in time we'll get to hear from Mr Malik himself. Julian Hill, we'll wrap it up there. Thanking you once again, and we'll have you back with us before too long, I'm sure.
Thanks, Greg.